And Annie, please take it away.
Excellent. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. All right. Good. I assume everybody can see my screen. Jason, can you just give me a yes or no?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Excellent. Okay, super. So a hearty welcome to everyone. I'm so happy you could join us today. Welcome to Anatomy of a Well-Planned for Disaster, presented by the Human Services Council of New York. My name is Annie Grunwald. You'll be meeting my colleague, Rebecca Hansen, a little further in the presentation. We're your presenters today, and we've also been working on the materials that you'll be hearing about throughout the presentation today. We know many of you in person. All of you should know about the Human Services Council, but in case you, for those of you not familiar with it, it's a wonderful organization, coalition of more than 170 members, and it works with members really to advocate for and foster collective action to strengthen nonprofit human services sector in New York City. And they have a number of wonderful initiatives, one of them being this disaster readiness and resilience program. The materials that we're going to speak about and that we're in the middle of this webinar right now is the first bunch of activities that initiatives in this program. The other two activities is that HSC does convene a disaster resilience and recovery work group with members, coalition members, to really enhance collaboration and resource identification around disaster preparedness. And they also participate and facilitate a number of research efforts in the same vein. We would not have any of these initiatives without important support. So we want to offer a very special thanks to New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and the Florence V. Burden Foundation for their continued support of the Disaster Readiness and Resilience Program. So we've been talking about these materials. What exactly are they? Your first little introduction is they're really in two groups. So we have this series of webinars, the first of which you're immersed in right now. We'll have 3 others that will be available online throughout the summer. And then there's an actual tool with lots of pieces to it, but it's an emergency management plan template, something that your organizations can use in part or in its entirety to develop or enhance your plan. And the toolkit is really an instruction guide. It gives an additional information, and it really shows you how to adjust the sections for the size type of your organization. So I don't think I have to convince you that New York City is a place where there are many hazards or types of events that we all have to be prepared for and have experienced in the past, from fires, snowstorms, hurricanes. We are all too familiar with what that coronavirus looks like. So we know that we are susceptible to many of these things. The human services community is the backbone of our communities, and that means during blue skies, and that means during disasters, and most definitely during the long recovery of disasters. So we really also know that comprehensive planning is not easy. So these tools are really to support you in those efforts. Again, the goals are to strengthen your ability wherever you are, to fulfill your mission, continuity of mission, right? Whatever disruptions you're faced with. And to do that, no matter where you are in the planning process, you may be new to this, or you may have staff members who are new that would like to take some webinar that will give them a good sense of what emergency planning is all about. Or you may have a very sophisticated program that you're very happy with. You don't want to move your template, or you don't like the way the template is organized, so you want to use your own. Perfect. But there may be a few parts or a few of the webinars that might be useful to you or some of your staff. So this is our hope, is that it's helpful for folks no matter where they are and what type of organization they are. So what are we going to do today? Really, as Jason pointed out, the purpose of this first webinar is just to really demonstrate the value of having a culture of emergency planning in your organization and introduce you to main planning concepts. You notice I use the term emergency planning and not a plan. So really, a plan is a receptacle, but everything you do is what informs what you put in that plan, and that you'll have something to use when an event happens. How are we going to do that? Well, we really didn't want to do another explanation of terms and sort of a dry presentation on that. So we wanted to just immerse you into a disaster journey. We've created this fictitious organization, and we're going to take you with that organization from their planning efforts to them responding to an event, to their goals of continuing their programs and then recovering from that event. And then finally, we want to kind of connect those events, the things that they did, with the components of the template that we produce, so you can start to kind of see how they relate. So, as they say, let the journey begin. So the first thing we want to do is just introduce you to our organization, ABC Community Center. It is likely not unlike many of your organizations in that it is multi-service. They serve the whole community that they are in. They have approximately 25 staff, some volunteers. Budget fluctuates, but it's about 4 million plus. Programming primarily happens in their building, which they have managed for many, many years. But they also do some school-based programs and some outreach. In terms of where things happen in their building, a lot of their classes and programs, crisis groups, happen in the basement. They have a drop-in center on the first floor. The ABC offices are on the second floor, and they have a small advocacy organization on the third floor. So we want to just give you a little history of their planning. Had been going along, and like for many of us, along came 2012, and it was a big wake-up call for them. Hurricane Sandy hit, as you all know, and they, of course, they were following the news, so they did understand that the hurricane was coming. They wanted to do some preparations, so they pulled down their disaster plan, which they hadn't really looked at for 6 years since the new director had come on board. And what they found is that it was essentially useless. It was not helpful. It was long, and they really weren't sure how to find what they needed. So that was disappointing to say the least, but they are human services people, right? We are resourceful. They responded the best that they could. And fortunately, their building didn't receive extensive damage, but it was damaged their programs were interrupted, their clients were severely infected, their staff was severely impacted. They did take big financial losses. And many of the staff really, after this traumatic experience, they really they left, and so they really had to do a strong rebuilding process. Luckily, they did have leadership at the time, including the board, that really understood that this was not acceptable, that they couldn't keep waiting for the time, that we're going to have time to plan. Nobody, I did that on purpose. We have a little, our background music. Nobody had, it's never the right time to develop the plan, and just having one person work on the plan is not enough, as we talked about anyway. So that was not working for them. So they thought, yeah, I can't just be this plan on a shelf that we update once a year that one person does. We need a new approach, right? So what they decided on after reading, talking to some folks, really said, we need a comprehensive program, something that's embedded in our existing systems, where the plan is the receptacle of everything that we do, not just what happens once a year. So they knew it wasn't going to be easy, and that this was going to be a process of really developing this plan and their mechanisms for planning, that was going to take some time. But they took some initial first steps. The first thing they did is that they looked at what they did after Sandy, right? Really looking at what they wish they would have had, what were some of the recovery things that they did, what are some of the great things that they did that they wanted to capture, what are some of the things that they wanted to improve. Then they created an emergency management standing board committee. They wanted to really say to the world and to everyone who came on board that this is important to us, and that we take it seriously. And we can use some board resources for that as well, including expertise. They also started an interdepartmental emergency planning committee. So they understood that they needed to have representation from all levels of the organization, as well as all departments, something that met regularly, but was really in charge of putting things together. And then they set some first year goals, and they approached this like they do all of their programs, right? So they put together a nice project management tool where they had, 20, 30 more things that they wanted to do than they would have time to do, they knew, in that first year. So they set their first year priorities. And they put together a first version of their emergency management plan. And they built, right? They built systems and programs, the program over the years. So some of the things that after 10 years they had in place were, one of the things I wanted to do is make sure that the nature of planning was embedded in the organization. So every year they did their departmental goals. Each of their departments had something related to resiliency or emergency or continuity planning in it. So everybody knew that was always on the mind. Each department also used one of their full departmental meetings a year to do what we call a little tabletop exercise, where they just talked through a particular emergency situation to use procedures and think of other sort of items, checklists that they might use if that event came up. The next thing they did is do a regular, what we call hazard vulnerability review, and insurance reviews every year. They had done insurance reviews, but certainly not regularly. So the hazard vulnerability really just looks at what does the city say could possibly happen? What do we know by the nature of our organization that could happen? We could have a medical emergency on staff. We could have someone in crisis. So what are these combined things, hazards that we need to plan for? And you really look at, and they look at that every year to see if it's changed, and that informs their planning. And then they started training their staff when they came into orientation, a good overview of what their plans were, what people's responsibilities would be during disasters that they might change. And then they taught folks, most importantly, how to respond to emergency situations at the site they were working in. That brings us to 2021. And when they did their hazard review, not surprisingly, rainwater, specifically flash flooding, was at the top of their list in terms of what they were most high at risk for. And that came up to the top because of three factors. Really, it's likely, this is something that is likely to happen. We know with increased global warming, we've seen it just recently in Ida. ABC luckily was not affected, but their partner organizations that they plan with, some of them were. They knew that if it did happen, the impact would be significant because of where most of their programs take place. And the third reason they were most vulnerable to this is that they didn't really have flash flooding procedures in place. So they took some actions based on this. They adjusted their insurance. They took what immediate steps they could to mitigate or reduce the damage of things in the basement. So they had some few paper files left. They luckily digitized most of them, but they've raised all of those things, put in new surge protectors for many years old, and did a number of things that would immediately kind of reduce their risk. They purchased a pump. They had one, it was useless, it was old, they purchased a new one. They made plans to raise their boiler in the basement the following year. And most importantly, they created some flash flood procedures and trained all their staff on them. So this all sets us up, the planning that happened, to a beautiful morning last fall. It's about 9:30. We already got a sense of what happens in this building, so it wasn't really any different that day. There were computer classes happening in the basement. Two staff members, Jean and Rose, were conducting those on site. In the drop-in center, they had some clients, including babies, toddlers, their normal clientele. There was one person using a walker. Third floor, there are a couple of folks in the business offices, including the executive director and the director of operations, who is Ava. And then on the third floor, there are a few people from the advocacy organization. So everybody, normal day, until all of a sudden, Jean and Rose, they heard this whooshing sound that's like shh sound, and they looked at each other, and before they could say anything, all of a sudden water came pouring into the basement. So what did Jean and Rose do? Well, they took action. Why did they take action? Because they were trained to take action. And what they knew they needed to do and were empowered to do, first of all, was get everybody, all they knew is that, hey, this could be dangerous. We're going to move everybody out of the way. So they did. They moved everyone out of danger up to the first floor. When they got to the first floor, they saw that water was not, it did not look like it was danger on the first floor. The water was not coming into the first floor. They contacted the designated emergency site lead that the organization had in place for many years. And what is an emergency site lead, you might ask? We're going to talk about that, take a break from our journey in a moment, just to give you a little more information about that. They kept everyone calm. and they waited for instructions. So what is an emergency site lead? Well, basically, they recognized ABC that if something happens right away at the facility, you need to know, what do we need to do right away? There needs to be one person in charge. It might not necessarily be the executive director, but it needs to be somebody in charge that is trained. So they had an emergency site lead both at their main site and at the school sites where they work in. Now, the site lead at the school sites was a little bit different, where they work closely with the facility person and the facility structure there, but they still had someone in charge of their folks who were at conducting programs in somebody else's facility. So here at ABC, the emergency site lead was 3 deep, meaning the first person on deck, if something happened, if this person was on site, maintenance director was the site emergency lead. Well, that person just happened to be sick that day. But remember, we saw Ava was in, right? So next in line was the operations director, Ava. So she knew that it was her this time. She was next in line. The director of case management did happen to be there that day, but they were not next in line. So they knew that Ava was going to be taking charge. So what did Ava do? Well, she took action, of course. And why did she take action? Because she had a nice checklist that she keeps in the offices for these kinds of events where she'd have to think quickly. And so her checklist included do a quick assessment. So she did. She looked around. She saw that water was in the street in front. There was emergency apparatuses coming in. The water department, DEP was there. And so she thought that this was probably a water main break, but really what she knew the assessment is that the most dangerous place was in the basement at the moment. She also knew she had to turn off the utilities right away, was trained to do that, so was able to do that quickly. Her other job was to ensure people were safe, and she knew that the staff did a great job, Jean and Rose, and folks were comfortably starting to be settled on the first floor. The ED really was pre-assigned. She knew that if she was there, she would be assigned to liaise with public safety. So she kind of stationed herself in the front to be able to talk with public safety personnel as they came by. And she was finally able to connect with someone from emergency management who happened to be there. It could have been someone from the fire department or DEP. And she got a good sense of what was happening. It was indeed a water main break. The water, they said they will probably not be able to turn it off for another hour or so. So that was helpful information. They also said, you have to keep folks in, please keep folks in. They exchanged phone numbers and they agreed to keep in contact, that she could contact them if she had any questions, and they would let her know as the situation changed. So the next thing that Ava did was she announced shelter in place. We all know what shelter in place is from last week and other events where many schools were in shelter in place, meaning it was safer to be inside than outside. There's an emergency situation on the outside. So and all of the staff knew what that meant and explained that to the folks around them. In the announcement, Ava gave as much information to everyone as she could. She knows that that puts people at ease. If they don't know what's happening, they're more likely to create stories in their head. So she explained it was a water main break for their safety, staying upstairs, that the utilities were out, and that was for their safety as well, but the situation was under control. They implemented a communication plan, their emergency communication plan, crisis communication plan, which indicated initial notifications. When something happens on site, these people should be notified. So that was activated. And Ava assign someone to start taking pictures. This is something that they learned from Sandy they didn't do soon enough. So they really wanted to get a sense of what was happening, a record of what damages there were. And as soon as the water was receiving that they were able to pump, then they would start kind of get a more detailed assessment of what the damages were. My clever animations. There we go. Okay, so what did the other staff do? Well, they're important players in all of this too, right? Spanish is the predominant language of folks that don't speak English, the clients of the center. So they always have somebody on site that speaks Spanish and was interpreting, translating for folks. Made sure everyone was comfortable. They had their emergency kits that they pulled out, and their kits reflected their clientele, right? So they had diapers, they had water, they had snacks, they had coloring books. So they had all kinds of things that they knew would keep people safe and more comfortable and calm. And they checked in with everyone, including the tenants upstairs. So this continued for about 30 minutes where activity was happening, getting everyone settled, getting information from public safety. And then they knew the situation was stable, right? And that's when leadership knew, all right, it's time to bring out our big guns. This is my own sound effects. So they knew it was time to bring out their continuity superpower. Zoinks, bam, zap. And there they are, you guessed it. It was the incident management team. All right, maybe you didn't guess it. Maybe you thought they really did have a superhero on staff. But although this is not a superhero, an incident management team is designed to manage situations that are not business as usual. We all have our table of organization, right? We tweak it, we change it to run business as usual, to run our programs. When we're under conditions where we're compromised, it requires really a different approach. Smaller team, trained to be making decisions quickly. So really, this is their superpower. What is it that the team does? Well, excuse me. The role of the IMT really is to continually assess the situations changing, both the external environment and the internal environment, right? So what's happening on the outside that's affecting us? What's happening with our building, with our programs, with our staff? How are they going to be affected with our clients? All of that, and continually revising their recovery goals and kind of steering the recovery. Their group is normally 4 people strong, but they have the ability to bring in specialists if they need them. So they decided that IT was going to be very important in this particular incident. So they brought in their IT consultant to confer with them initially. They also set, 4 main continuity recovery goals right off the bat. They wanted to keep their essential services running, serving their clients as the best that they could, number 1 priority, keep their critical business operations going that support those functions. They wanted to restore their building as soon as possible because that's where they present many of their programs and where their administrative offices are. And then, of course, financial recovery. They couldn't do any of that if they didn't have financial stability. So let's take a look at each of these pieces separately. So programs, continuity. Place here. what we know is that luckily, one of the things that ABC did put in place for a mechanism is that they have a portion of their plan called continuity of operations. And they had spent a lot of time in the past where they have done what's called prioritizing essential services, or it's their COOP plan, we call it sometimes. And what they did is they looked at everything that they do, and they knew that under certain circumstances, they wouldn't be able to keep doing everything that they do. But they identified those programs that had the biggest impact if they stopped on their clients. So really their top programs for reducing disruptions type of programs were counseling for at-risk youth, and their drop-in center, which and every day they dealt with families in crisis. So those were the two main programs. Because they had identified them, they developed some contingency plans. What if we can't be in the facility? What if we don't have all of our staff able to come in? So they reference those staffs and that those plans in order to activate some actions to get those programs, keep those programs running, hoping with the fewest disruptions. They also knew that their after-school programs, some of them might not be disrupted, that if they could get their staff there, and some of the schools might have been in the area that was hurt. So they knew right off they were going to get their after-school planning lead to do an assessment and see what how soon they could keep providing those programs. And then all of the other programs they suspended. Why did they suspend them? Not that they didn't want to keep going as soon as they could, but they weren't as critical as the other ones. So they suspended them for some time so they could get their bearings, start cleaning up the facility, and they activated their suspension plan, which calls for communicating with their clients. They also activated their telephone reassurance plan, something they set up after Hurricane Sandy, where they wish they could have quickly known their most vulnerable clients and put in place. They did it, but it just took them more time to really call and check in on their most vulnerable clients. The other goals, clear, get the physical plant cleaned up as soon as possible. So they put someone in charge of physical plant repairs. Critical business operations, as we said, they started looking at, well, what are some of those human resources policies that we're going to have to revisit for this particular disaster, keeping in touch with everyone, making sure folks are okay. And then, of course, financial recovery, really looking at are all of the our contracted services, make sure we get a hold of those folks, our stakeholders, that they understand what's happening. We don't want to disrupt our the finances coming in, keeping an eye out for any other opportunities for financing, and ensuring that fundraising was continuing. So what happened the rest of the day? At the end of the IMT meeting, somebody was taking notes. They set tasks associated with these goals, made assignments, a plan for sharing and keeping staff up to date. They coordinated with their neighborhood coalition that they work with on a number of initiatives. They set 2 more meetings during that day, because they knew this first day the situation was changing quickly. Meanwhile, folks were able to leave safely before noon. Some staff stayed on board, some left. Everybody was able to leave by 5:30 or so, and they did have their last meeting remotely, the IMT, at 3 o'clock. And basically what they did on those meetings and continue to do was adjust their plans and goals based on the changing situation. So the next 2 weeks, same thing. Gradually, they got all of their programs up. They adjusted, though, as they went along, but their priority programs, they only missed, I think, 1 day with those programs. physical plant infrastructure, that was in place. The repairs were in place. One of the things that they had on their list was to actually add a lift to the facility to make sure that it was fully accessible for all their clients. And so that was supposed to be slated for a year or two ahead. They decided it would save a lot of money to do that at the same time that they were doing the repairs. Human resources, pretty much back to normal. They continued their check-ins and communication with staff. Financial recovery, there was a reimbursement program that the city offered. So they were able to take advantage of that because they had they were keeping great records of their emergency expenses, started the insurance reimbursement process. And how long did the team stay? The answer is how long this IMT should stay together is however long it's needed. So in this case, after about 2.5 weeks, they didn't see a purpose in it anymore. So really, their meetings became check-ins, right? How's this? How's this? How's this? So they appointed one person to be in charge of recovery who liaised with all of the ongoing departments that had tasks associated with recovery. Important thing is that by week 6, they started capturing all the things that they knew that they did well and that they knew they could have done better. So they did a number of things, departmental discussions, they did anonymous surveys to get information back from folks. And based on that information, they created an improvement plan, which then fed into their plan, was part of their planning, and they're back at this sort of a state of what we call blue skies for now. So that brings us full circle. And now I'm delighted we've kind of finished our journey, and I am delighted to pass this over to my colleague, Rebecca Hansen. And you won't see me now.
Great, thanks, Annie. And hello, everyone. Yes, we're gonna move now away from the journey, but we're going to keep thinking about that as we look at what some of the benefits are that we can see all the efforts to do the emergency planning that the ABC organization did before the event occurred for all those years, really, since Sandy had happened. We can start to see these benefits like that that occurred. One thing that we see is that through the planning, there was an enhanced ability to keep people safe and to make sure their well-being. Some of the examples of that we saw in this scenario that Annie presented was that, one, Jean and Rose were able to quickly move people out of the basement and bring them to the first floor. They were empowered. They knew that they had the ability and they had the the discretion to go and make those decisions to move people quickly out of harm's way. Another example of how the safety and well-being was enhanced was that Ava, who wasn't normally the maintenance director, had prior to this event happening, had been trained on how to assess the building systems, how to turn the electricity off. And she was able to do that quickly after the water main break started, though the water started coming into the building. Another example is when they did the shelter in place, they had the supplies readily available for the people that were in the building and were holding steady until they were able to leave, right? So they had snacks, they had juices, they also had diapers and things like that that they knew that their clients might need if they were to be in a shelter in place situation in their building. And so I really just want to highlight, what we see as often the benefit of planning is that people are able to take action more quickly because they're aware of their roles. They understand the plans. They've built the plans and been part of the process of developing them. So the actions happen much quicker than if maybe they didn't do that before. They have the skills to do things that maybe they wouldn't have normally had. And they are able to make decisions that are more thoughtful. They're not always on the, I mean, there are some decisions always in a disaster you have to make on the go, but a lot of things, and we'll look at that as we go through some of these benefits, are really well thought out decisions that they were able to make because they had thought about it and done the planning beforehand. So let's look at another benefit. Obviously, the ability to continue their services, at least their priority services, despite what was going on at the building, is a huge benefit. And really, because of their planning, that was able to happen almost seamlessly with their priority services, like with the crisis counseling. What they had done in their planning, they had pre-identified which are the services that are their essential services that they want to keep going almost no matter what, and which are the ones that maybe they could suspend for some period of time in order to give themselves some time to get back up and running in a normal way. So they had these plans in place prior to this happening. And so they were able to quickly decide, all right, we want to keep our teen counseling program going, but we can't do it in this building. So they had identified an alternate place where they could provide that program. And so they were able to quickly move it the next day to that site. And really, except for one day, that was the only disruption to the program. And so having these plans in place really allows those kinds of things to happen too. They also had their incident management team already set up, already trained. And so they were easily came together. They were ready to make decisions. They knew how to assess the situation. They knew the plans. And so they could quickly put these things into place, which also allowed for the continuity of their services. Another benefit was just for the integrity of the infrastructure. Because they had this person, Ava, who had been trained and knew the different building systems, they were able to take actions quickly. They were able to prevent further damage from happening. Because they had done their hazard analysis and they had planned for a flash flood, if you remember, they had moved all their computers up to higher shelves. They had put surge protectors on, and they had thought through some of that beforehand. And so they were able to keep that infrastructure intact, which also leads to the reduction of financial losses, which is always a great benefit we want to think about. Because they were able to move up some of that equipment, because they were able to turn the electricity off and prevent further damage from happening, they were able to reduce financial losses. In addition, because they had thought about the flash flooding happening, they had increased their insurance, and so they were able to get more coverage to support the repairs and the losses that they did incur as a result of the flooding. So thinking through these things beforehand has many great benefits. Another benefit is that it also gives you peace of mind when you know that there are plans in place, when people are trained. They really have a sense of empowerment. They have a sense of just knowing and being confident that they can make the right decisions, and they are proud of their response because they're not just, like I said before, they're not just thinking of all these things right on the fly. They've really thought through and are able to make some really wise decisions in the way that they respond and they recover. Another way that we see that there was peace of mind was with the clients. Right away, one of the things they did was activate their communications plan. They checked in with their clients and they really tried to communicate what was happening, what was going on with the programs, what were the changes. And so this also gives their clients a sense of control, and which gives some peace of mind. And finally, another benefit, and there are other benefits, but we're just touching on these today. Another benefit is that they were able to support the recovery of their community. So they enacted their telephone reassurance program for their seniors to check in to see if anybody else was affected by the flooding and if they needed some kind of assistance. And they were coordinating with their partners that they had identified in their community and who also do similar services with them. So these are all benefits that I hope that you can see came from the planning that they did. And remember, their planning wasn't done once a year, it was done through the years, and it takes time to build these programs. And you know, we just want to encourage you that, you know, as if you can make this part of what you do, little by little, you get stronger and stronger. So let's take another quick look at what the planning resources are that you have. Annie talked about this before. So you have the template and the toolkit, and that is really to help guide you in your planning process, and also help you document that and put that in a plan. And then we're also going to provide these webinars to you. Today is the first one, and then there are additional webinars. The next one coming up will really dive into these planning materials, looking at how do we use the template, how does the toolkit help us in our planning process. And then we'll have 2 more webinars, one on building in resiliency, which is how to really incorporate preparedness into your everyday life at your organization. And then the incident management webinar will really look at how do you create an incident management team and how that can really help you in an emergency. So what we want to do now is just kind of take the scenario that Annie shared with you and connect it to the emergency plan. And so on the left side of this slide, you'll see 1 through 12, you see the different sections of the plan template. And what I want you to then look at is on the right side, is looking at that cycle. So in emergency management, we talk about this cycle all the time, that one phase leads into another phase, leads into another phase, and they sort of overlap and inform each other. So if we look at the top, if you recall, the ABC organization learned a lot from Sandy. They didn't feel like their plans were adequate. Oh, we just skipped ahead. Can we go back? And then they moved into the response phase, right? When something happened, they were able to activate those plans. They then brought their team together to think about how they can continue their programs going. Then they moved into recovery. And then from there, they started thinking about, well, what do we need now to make our plans stronger? What did we learn from this event that we can now incorporate into our plans? And then the cycle begins again. So you can see that this kind of keeps moving around and around as we go through different parts of the cycle. So now if we go to the next slide, if you recall, after the organization went through Hurricane Sandy and they decided they needed plans, they put together a planning committee. They decided they were going to do a hazard vulnerability assessment every year. They were going to look at their insurance and make sure that was adequate every year based on what hazards were they most at risk for. They talked about training, right? They did a lot of training with their staff. They did exercises and drills to test out the plans. All of these kinds of things that we've talked about in the scenario that they were working on, all of that can be found in section 2 of the template, planning and preparedness. So we have guidance on how you can do that take those kinds of steps. We have some checklists. We have existing training that's already out there and some topics that you might want to train your staff on. So you can see a lot of that stuff in there. And I'll remind you that our webinar, Building in Resiliency, is all about this phase. It's all about taking these planning committees and looking at how you can really develop your plan at your organization and build it into your everyday life of the organization. So moving around now, we saw when the water main break occurred, they immediately went into action. They identified who their site emergency lead was, which was Ava. They were able to quickly move people out of the basement. They started to make certain decisions, and that kind of stuff that happens early on in the emergency response is in section 4 of the plan template. So really, when you think about your fire and safety plans, those kinds of things, that's what you would find in section 4. And we will walk you through that in the next webinar as well. So keep moving around that cycle. Remember when they brought their incident management team together, when they started to think about, okay, now we have this thing happen, how are we going to continue our operations and how are we going to recover from what happened? And that team and how that team works is really covered in section 3 of the plan. And what that also includes is, you know, a structure that can be small or large, depending on your organization. It lays out some of the roles and responsibilities of different people on that team. It goes through a plan template, sorry, not a plan template, a meeting template, so that when you do have a meeting, you can kind of follow that and look at the important things to discuss and cover in the meetings. So we have a lot of those kinds of tools and information in section 3 of the plan. Moving along. Oh, and let me mention that the webinar 4 is really focused on this incident management team. I mentioned that earlier. I just want to bring that up again so that you make that connection. Okay, moving along. As you know, the ABC organization decided to look at what their essential services were, figure out which programs and how they were going to continue those programs, the essential programs, and keep them going. And they made decisions about which programs they were going to suspend, right? All of these things that we've been talking about. Well, all of those kinds of planning ideas and issues are covered in section 5, continuity of operations, where we have developed a tool that will help you prioritize all of your services and figure out which ones are your essential programs. Part of that section looks at, well, what are the resources that it takes to keep those services going? What are the staff you need? What's the IT, you know, things like that. So that section really looks and helps you develop how you can keep your programs going, even when disruptions and emergencies happen. And moving to the next slide. Uh-oh. Just give it a second to bring the.
Sorry, I'm unmuting. Hi, everyone. Something, let's see. I'm just going to pull it back up. Can we see it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. So we're going to move on. Let's see. Oh, there we are.
Okay.
Okay.
We just wanted to highlight a couple areas here. We talk a lot about the importance of communications, communicating with the staff, communicating with your clients and letting them know what's going on throughout the whole emergency and into recovery. All of that kind of stuff is covered in section 6 of the plan template. And that includes having, you know, a list of your contacts, knowing how you're contacting them, what are some modalities, your primary way of contacting, but what are some backups that you have? Also, how do you make decisions about what information is shared and what information is not shared and when? So all of that is covered in the communications section. In the human resources section, if you recall, they made decisions about allowing staff to telework or not telework. They made decisions about keeping staff for overtime, things like that. And all of those kinds of human resources issues that come up during emergencies is covered in section 9. And then finally, if you think back to the scenario, we talked a lot about the fact that they had looked at their insurance and that they had figured out ways to keep track of the costs during the recovery phase. And all of that is covered in the financial resiliency section of the plan template. And what I really want to emphasize here is that while you do have the template, you also have the toolkit, which provides a lot of guidance on, okay, well, how do you make that happen? How do you use these tools that we've provided? And so we hope that you'll be able to really use them and make sense of them. But again, we have a lot of support for you. So we have the toolkit, and then we have the 4 webinars that we've talked about, which really, the next one, again, is going to really dive into the tools, the template and the toolkit. So we hope that you will start taking a look at those. The plans, the template and the toolkit will be available in the next week or two. So you'll be able to just go on the HSC website and pull them off and use them. They'll be in a Word document so that you're able to manipulate the documents. And then the webinars will be available this summer. And I think what is great about the webinars is that you can use them as trainings. You can share them with your staff. You can look at them again and again and pull and really hone in on the areas that you're most interested in. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much for participating. We're really excited to see so many people on the webinar today, and we are really encouraged that these will be made available, and there'll be hopefully lots of people checking in on them as we are able to get them up on the website as well. That said, we would love to get your feedback. We would love to know what you think about the materials, what you think about the webinars, and also we want to know if there are other topics that you really think we need more information on, and you would like to see maybe a webinar or some tools on. And you can email us at info@humanservicescouncil.org, or you can just email any of us, Annie, myself, or Jason, and let us know any ideas or any feedback you have. We really look forward to hearing that, because these things are all for you. And the more we hear from you, the better we can make the quality so that you're able to use them. So thanks again for participating, and we look forward to seeing you in the next webinars.